Hey everybody, I wanted to share a product comparison of three laptops from Lenovo that are all thin and light laptops that are great for productivity. Two of them are ThinkPads. One of them is a ThinkPad T14s, another is the ThinkPad X13, and then the third is the Thinkbook. It doesn't say over here, but it's the Thinkbook 13s. I thought I would pick these three laptops because I spend time online, and I know a lot of people this year, as they've been shopping for, people who are shopping for a thin and light productivity laptop have wondered, well, aren't these about the same, the T14s and the X13, and then of course you have the ThinkBook 13s that has a lot of the same specs, and it's significantly cheaper than the two ThinkPads. So at least that was what I was sort of going through, thinking through in my mind, and so I managed to get my hands on all three. This is my laptop, by the way. This is actually last year's model, last year's model of the X13, and it's a great laptop. And I'm considering whether to upgrade to this year's versions, because this year's AMD processors are significantly better in terms of graphics processing. So I thought, maybe I'll upgrade to that, and I got a T14s to test out, and then my friend got the ThinkBook 13s also with this year's processor. So I'll go through each of these in detail about what their specs are and their pros and cons. I'll try to be as succinct as I can. Ultimately, the purpose is just to help you decide which one of these three laptops might be best for you, given that the ThinkBook is significantly cheaper. But it turns out, maybe this is kind of just going to the giving you the conclusion a little bit too early, but I think this one is actually by far the best value for money. So with that said, this is the ThinkPad T14s 2022 model. It's the Gen 3. It's got the Ryzen 7 6850U processor that has 8 cores, as well as the new RDNA2 GPU, integrated GPU. It's got the 400 nit screen, which is one level above the base level screen available if you were to buy this off the Lenovo website. And the screen is fine. It's 1920 by 1200, which is considered FHD plus resolution, 100% sRGB or 72% NTRC or whatever that acronym is. It's a very good screen. And I got this for about $1,300 before tax. This is the X13, and like I said, this I purchased last year. This is the 2021 model. It has an AMD Ryzen 5 5650U processor, which has only 6 cores compared to 8 of that one. But it doesn't have the new RDNA2 processor, as I mentioned, because again, this is a year old. It doesn't have that processor. I got this. I'm not going to talk about the price because it's not really apples to apples. I got this last year, but I will say if you got this year's version of the X13, the Gen 3, and you got the same 6850U processor with the same overall configuration, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of SSD storage, this one would probably cost $1,200, so $1,300, $1,200. This ThinkBook 13s has a Ryzen 6800U, which is the same as the 6850. It just, I think, is missing certain enterprise security features, but it's really otherwise identical to the 6850U processor. It also has 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gigabyte hard drive, SSD drive. This one was $830. Okay, so $830. If we got this year's version of the X13, the same specs, let's say $1,200, and this one was $1,300 before tax. A big difference between the ThinkBook and the ThinkPads, and I will just quickly say that, look, ThinkPads have historically been, Lenovo's top of the line, large enterprise / corporate productivity laptop. All the companies that I've worked at have used ThinkPads, and they're great. They're great laptops, right? They're very durable. You drop them, they don't, break and so forth. Obviously, if you purposely try to break it, you can break it. And they have great keyboards. And this really depends on kind of how old you were when you started using machines with track points. I think Dell as well as Toshiba all used to have this. They had different names for it, but it really is a very ergonomic way to move your cursor to drag and drop and so forth, because you don't have to move your hand to move the cursor. If you're typing and you want to move something, you just move your finger without, your wrist is still kind of resting here. So I've always loved the track point, and every ThinkPad aficionado will know exactly what I mean, because most of them love the track point. Is probably one of the biggest reasons why they keep using and wanting to buy ThinkPads. The other big difference, of course, is the keyboard. There's dedicated page up, page down keys, home and end on the ThinkPad keyboard. Same for this one, which you don't get on consumer grade laptops, where page up, page down, home and end are put on the same keys as the directional keypad, where you have to use the function key in order to use them. And people who use a lot of Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel will know the value of having dedicated page up, page down, and so forth. It just makes it more efficient to get work done sometimes. So with that said, I will quickly go through each of these laptops to kind of just give you a feel for them, and then I'll talk about why one might be a better choice than the other. Again, at the end of the day, it depends on what matters to you. So the ThinkPad T14s Gen 3 2022 Ryzen 7 6850U. This one has the 400 nit screen, which is one step up from the baseline screen model. I think I already mentioned 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabyte SSD. So the screen is a good screen, okay? 400 nits, 1920 by 1200, which is what they call a FHD plus screen. It's got the 16:10 aspect ratio. 2022, this Gen 3 is the first year in which Lenovo has put a 16:10 screen into the T14s. It's a very welcome change, because I think a lot of people were just finding, look, we moved to 16:9 10 years ago, whatever, across almost every laptop under the sun, because people just thought, everyone's going to be watching YouTube videos and Netflix. But in reality, people do work on their laptops, and having a little bit extra vertical screen real estate makes a big difference. So very happy there's a 16:10 aspect ratio. The screen quality, look, it's plenty bright. 400 nits is plenty bright. And the color gamut, 100% sRGB, or maybe 72% NTRC, or whatever that acronym is. It's good. It's not great. It's never going to be able to compare to, like, let's say the mini LED screen on a MacBook Pro 14-inch, the M1 MacBook Pro 14-inch. And but that's not this laptop is not in that. Is just, you can't compare it to that MacBook, right? The MacBook Pro, which costs significantly more. So the screen, though, is very good. By ThinkPad standards, I would say it's quite good. Probably not the best ThinkPad screen I've ever seen, but it's pretty good. Webcam, right? I'm not going to show you video output of the webcam, but I will say this year they switched to 1080p. Lenovo switched to 1080p from 720p last year. That's a welcome improvement. However, when I tested it, look, the image quality, the video quality is still grainy. It definitely did not handle shadows and low lighting very well. I was disappointed in its ability to capture just sharp imaging or video when the lighting was poor. I guess I shouldn't have expected too much, and I didn't. It was as I expected. And for ThinkPads, I've always expected the webcams to be mediocre at best. I thought, okay, let's see, maybe it would get better now that they upgraded to 1080p this year, but it was pretty much what you'd expect. It was very mediocre. And then audio, the speaker grills, as you can see, are right here. Also very mediocre. If you're a longtime ThinkPad user, you will know what I'm talking about. This is audio quality that is fine for conference calls and maybe watching the news or watching some kind of an interview of a person talking on YouTube. But if you're watching any type of real, a video or audio that has, music or a movie where high fidelity and some bass is important, like, these are not the speakers to do that. Keyboard. Look, ThinkPads have always and will always, knock on wood, will always have great keyboards, and this is no exception. It's a very good keyboard. I will say that compared to previous ThinkPad keyboards, I'm slightly disappointed. Again, if you're a ThinkPad aficionado, you have very, very high expectations when it comes to keyboards. And as you know, or any ThinkPad aficionado will know, that Lenovo has kept progressively reducing the key travel on their keyboards over the years, from over 2 millimeters of travel to 1.8, 1.7 millimeters of travel to finally in the last year or two reducing it to 1.4 millimeters. Now with that said, there's still great, tactile feedback, and the key travel is still probably a little bit better, maybe 0.1, 0.2 millimeters better than a lot of consumer grade laptops. So I still very much like this keyboard, and like I mentioned, the dedicated page up, page down, home and end, track point, still make me really, really like this keyboard. However, I will mention two complaints that I have. One is, unlike previous ThinkPad keyboards that I've had, this year's version has a coating that makes the keys a little bit rough. I'm used to keys that are kind of, smooth, polished even, not polished to the point where it's almost, like glass, but, where there's sort of a polished matte finish. And this one just has the same kind of rough texture that the black gray paint that is used on the rest of the ThinkPad chassis. And this is, of course, the paint that, is very, which attracts a lot of fingerprints, oily fingerprints, and so forth. I don't know why they don't stick with just real black. Over the last few years, they've been using this kind of dark gray. But anyway, that's besides the point. The point is the keys have a rough texture. I don't like it. Maybe over time, as I type more, use it, the friction from the typing will wear away whatever that coating is, and it will become smooth the way I like it. But if that happens, it will mean that the keys that I use less will still have that rough texture, while the ones that I use a lot will be smoothed out. And I don't think that's ideal. And then some of the keys, like the backspace key, maybe the tab, I just noticed the ones that are a little bit wider, although not every one of them, they have a little bit of left-right give. When I hit a key, I like the key to depress down and down only. And for example, backspace, I could just feel, it's like maybe the left side of the key depresses a little easier than the right side. It just doesn't feel as high quality as I'm used to, because look, I've been a long time ThinkPad user. So a little disappointed that there is a little bit of wobble in some of the keys, and maybe because it's of the rough texture or whatnot, the keys just feel a little bit cheap. Okay, and again, I'm coming from several ThinkPads in the past that have great keyboards. My last one before my X13 over here was a ThinkPad T14s that had 1.8 millimeters of travel. That keyboard was a dream, and definitely better than what we have now, but these are still very good keyboards. But I mentioned my two complaints. Next, the touchpad. Now, very smooth. I think the materials is Mylar. Again, it's not, I've seen some touchpads even today, like on the Lenovo Legion series, not the Legion 7, but the Legion 5 and 5 Pro, that still use a plastic trackpad, and those just feel like crap. This one it's Mylar, it feels very high quality, but it has a problem. The problem is, if you look over here at the left edge, it wobbles a little bit. I don't know if you can kind of see that, right? I'm not even pressing down with enough pressure to sort of activate the clicker. But you can see that there is movement in the touchpad. Now, if I actually wanted to press the key, right, you can hear it and you can see it. But I don't think a touchpad should be moving unless I do that. This is weird that when I just gently touch it, it's literally moving. And, honestly, I think that's a quality control issue. I don't think it actually affects the performance of the touchpad, but it just feels a little, you don't really like to have moving pieces. And the fact that it's kind of, gently wobbling slightly, it's a little, maybe it won't bother most people, but if you're someone like me, it bothers me a little bit. So that's the ThinkPad T14s. I'll come back a little bit on performance in a little bit. This is the ThinkPad X13. Like I said, this is last year's version, but I think it's a good proxy for this year's version, because the chassis, the keyboard, the screen, everything is the same. The 2022 model just has the new, the new AMD Ryzen 6000 series processors. But what I will say is the screen quality, it's also a 1920 by 1200 FHD plus screen, 300 nits, which is plenty bright. Honestly, I upgraded to 400 nits on this one when I ordered it. But from a practical perspective, do I need that extra brightness? Probably not, except for maybe that 0.2% use case scenario when I somehow find myself in the middle of the park with the sun bearing down on me. Most of the time when I'm indoors or even outdoors in the shade, something like like 70 to 80% brightness is more than enough. When I'm indoors, I would say mostly it's usually about 65% of the max brightness. And maybe when I'm outdoors in the shade, maybe 80% of the max brightness. I hardly ever even need to use the full 300 nits. Screen is fine. Again, can't compare to a MacBook Pro 14-inch, but the screen is very good for productivity. I think it's, again, 100% sRGB, so forth, and I like it. Keyboard. Now, this keyboard has everything I'd expect in the ThinkPad keyboard. Great tactile feedback. Like I said, the key travel has been reduced to 1.4 millimeters, as it has on pretty much every ThinkPad at this point. Every X series, T series, and so forth, and X1 series. But this one doesn't have any noticeable left-right wobble on some keys. So I like this keyboard more. And then, of course, and then this one has the smooth finish that I'm used to. I really don't know why the keys on this new T14s have this rough finish. I just don't like it. I like smooth keys. And then next, the touchpad. This, I think, is just a better built one, where when you gently touch it, there's a tiny bit of wobble, but when I'm looking at this screen as I'm filming, I can barely notice it, right? Of course, when you actually are trying to press the key, you will see the touchpad depress, but otherwise you don't see the wobble that you kind of see on the T14s model here. So I'm much happier with the keypad on this one. Maybe I shouldn't say much happier, but I am materially happier because of the smooth finish and the lack of wobble, and the touchpad's lack of wobble. And then I won't really talk about webcam and audio, because they're basically the same as on the T14s. Here's the Thinkbook 13s, and I would just say, look, I expected the Thinkbook to the quality of the build and so forth to reflect its significantly lower price compared to the two ThinkPads over here. But you know what? I am super impressed, because I don't think any sacrifices have been made in terms, or any noticeable sacrifices have been made in terms of, components. The screen quality is excellent. The screen quality is basically, this has the same screen as the X13. It's a 300 nit FHD plus with a 16:10 aspect ratio, same color gamut, 100% sRGB. It's a great screen. And, and what's more, because the Thinkbook has a smaller footprint, it has a smaller bezel, which just makes it look a lot sleeker than the ThinkPad. I mean, something like this doesn't bother me too much, but it is noticeable how much sleeker the Thinkbook is. Now, what's really surprised me is, I'll come back to the keyboard, but the keyboard did surprise me. The webcam was noticeably better than on the ThinkPads. It handled low lighting and shadows better, and there was better clarity, less graininess. This is a 1080p camera, and then the audio was definitely also better. Again, you can't compare any of this stuff to what you get on much more expensive MacBook Pro, but the audio was noticeably better than on the ThinkPad. So you got better webcam, better audio, same quality screen. Now, keyboard. Now, I expected the keyboard to be similar to, typical consumer grade laptops keyboard, with very low key travel, very poor tactile feedback, where when you press on the key, it just kind of depresses without any kind of bounce back, if you will, or pushback, whatever you want to call it. Not the case at all. These keys, when you push on them, you need to apply a little bit of pressure. I'm not saying like these are difficult to press, these keys, but I like the fact that there is significant tactile feedback. When you're hitting these keys, and maybe even more so than on the ThinkPads. There's absolutely zero wobble, zero, right? Zero. In that perspective, this keyboard is actually better than the ThinkPad keyboard, which when you kind of just touch it, you can kind of hear it, some things that make it sound like the keys are moving a little bit, but there's no wobble in these keys at all on the Thinkbook. One difference is the keys on the Thinkbook are completely flat. The keys on the ThinkPad are ever so slightly concave, which I like. But, honestly, it doesn't make any difference. I could be very comfortable typing on these keys, but yes, if I could choose, I would like that ever tiny bit of concavity on the keys that you on the ThinkPad that you don't have on the ThinkBook. But ultimately, what's much more important is lack of wobble and tactile feedback, key travel, which I think is the same. You can just take a look, from the side here. This is your 1.4 millimeters of travel. Same on this model, the X13, and then on the ThinkBook 13s. I mean, maybe it's a little less, but honestly, instead of 1.4, maybe it's 1.3, 1.2, but it's not noticeable. Seriously, the tactile feedback makes up for any, if any, reduced key travel there is. The only thing, again, like I said, you don't have the dedicated page up, page down, you don't have the track point, the touchpad is excellent. The touchpad has no wobble whatsoever. Of course, when you obviously press it, you can get the nice click and you see the touchpad depress, but otherwise you don't get any of the ridiculous wobble that you get on the ThinkPad T14s. So yeah, I mean, I've been very, very, very happily surprised at the overall usability of this laptop. And then of course it's out in an even smaller form factor than the X13. The X13, as you can see, a little bit wider here on the side. It's got the wider bezels. And if you were to, just put this laptop side by side, you will see the smaller footprint. And then of course, you can see how slim the ThinkBook is, whereas the ThinkPad is a little bit chunkier. And I will say that the ThinkPad T14s and the X13 probably have the same thickness. It's just the width and the depth that are different between the two, because one has a 14-inch screen, one has a 13-inch screen. Okay, and so I think I've covered all the usability aspects of these laptops. What I'm going to quickly do is just talk about performance. And the comparison really will be between the T14s and the ThinkBook, because they have the same processor. This one has the Ryzen 6850U 8-core with RDNA 2 graphics. This one has the 6800U 8-core with RDNA graphics. The difference between 6850 and 6800 is simply that this one lacks some of the enterprise security features that really no one really needs, okay? So here are the results. 1528 single core under Geekbench 5, about 8,000 multi-core, right? 1528, 8,000. On the ThinkBook 13s, 1488 single core, pretty much the same, but you have significantly lower multi-core. And I think this is basically have to do with just the reduced thermal dissipation characteristics of the slimmer laptop, slimmer form factor of the ThinkBook. You can't dissipate as much heat when you have all those cores running. The processor just isn't able to run as hard or as much as on that laptop, where because it's a thicker laptop, it probably can dissipate heat better. The cores can operate at a higher capacity or higher throughput for a longer period of time. Now, I may be misspeaking a little bit here. I'm not an expert when it comes to this particular topic, but you can see there is a difference, a very noticeable difference in multi-core. With that said, is that really going to affect your day-to-day performance of this laptop? Not really. Most things that we do, checking email, browsing the internet, and even gaming just uses one core, and maybe in some games will use a few cores, but very few processes. Maybe if you're doing video editing or some type of very heavily intensive CPU-oriented task that can make use of all 8 cores, will be impacted by this. Most of what you do is not. So will there really be a difference? No, I don't think so. But for sure, the thermal dissipation characteristics of the ThinkBook 13s is lower or less than the T14s. Now, the X13, I can't really compare it to these other two, because this one has the 1-year-old or 1.5-year-old Ryzen 5 5650U processor. Is only 6 cores. It doesn't have the RDNA 2. So you can see, obviously, the results are different and lower than the two newer processors, but it does have a chassis that is thicker than the 13S, the Thinkbook 13S. So look, you're going to get better performance if you put the same 6850U processor in here. And then I think I forgot to just share the OpenCL, which is the graphics benchmark on Geekbench 5. Got 32,000 for the T14S, 32,000, and then on the Thinkbook you got 27. So again, clearly the process, even though we have the same processor, the processor is not able to process as hard in the Thinkbook 13S as on the T14S. But then again, this laptop costs $1,300, 830, right? So depending on what you want to do, this could be a better laptop for you. And that's all I really wanted to share with you all today. I like all three laptops. I mean, I think from a just overall usability and form factor perspective, I realize now that I have the T14S in hand, I like the X13 more. It's a little bit more compact, but once you have both in hand, this actually feels a little chunky, and this one just feels like, yeah, you put it in your lap, you barely even notice it's there. It's great, and it's got the great keyboard. It also has the touchpad, or the track point rather. And screen quality, even though that's 400 nits, this one I don't think this has a 400 nit upgrade option. There's a 500 nit upgrade option that has the privacy guard feature, which I don't like. Don't recommend anybody getting the 500 nit screen with privacy guard. I think I've heard bad things about it, but 300 nits, more than enough. I think having held these two, ideally I would just have an X13 Gen 3, this year's model, that has the 6850U processor. I'd pay, whatever, $1,200 for it if I could. But for someone who wants to spend less, you can't go wrong with the Thinkbook. This is, it is sleek. And honestly, another thing I should mention is the Thinkbook has great ports. It's got one USB-A, two USB-C, and an HDMI port, which is, for the price point, this is a super laptop. I would say these, for the price point and the actual specs, processing specs, like RAM, processor, RAM, storage, you're not getting as much money as you could easily get those specs for far less on a consumer grade laptop. You're definitely paying a significant or big premium to get the ThinkPad features of the keyboard, the track point, and the quality build. They say it's what's called mil-spec tested, certain 15, 17, 18 military grade tests, you're dropping it from a certain height, pouring water or coffee on it to see if it's still going to work. Those things, could be valuable to some people. I've never spilled coffee. I'm a careful guy. I've never spilled coffee or water on my laptop. I've never dropped it from 10 feet high. At best, maybe I plopped it on the table, kind of, not too gently. So honestly, does everybody really need the type of mil-spec build quality of a ThinkPad? No. But unfortunately, you can't get a track point from anybody else now these days. And I really do like having page up, page down. And it is a very nice keyboard. And that's that. So let me know your thoughts. I'm not a person who makes a lot of videos. This is actually my first or second video. So apologies if I don't give you the same quality of stuff, but hopefully some of these things that I've talked about have been helpful to you, and click like if you do like it. And if you have any comments, feel free to share. Bye-bye.